Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
We can't have a national security system that fails to tackle people who are a danger to our values, our security, our children. We have to be ready to face every threat.
Keir Starmer there, speaking as he announced a public inquiry into last summer's Southport murders. He says the crime should draw a line in the sand, but can he get the public on side? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm James Woolcock. It's been almost 6 months since 3 young girls were killed in Southport, Merseyside. Their murder sparked a storm of online misinformation, saying the man behind the attack was a migrant. That's untrue. That he was Muslim, also untrue. But those untruths sparked a period of riots and unrest led by those on the far right. Now this morning, the Prime Minister is launching an inquiry. He says that terrorism has changed. Threats now come from lone actors, often radicalised online, instead of organised groups like Al-Qaeda.
Well, he might be looking to get to the bottom of those murders, but Starmer has not escaped criticism for his conduct at the time. During this morning's press conference, he faced harsh questioning about his decision to conceal the suspect's prior referral to the government's anti-extremism programme, Prevent, 3 times between 2019 and 2021, and also his previous contact with the police, with courts and social services. The Prime Minister was also asked whether he regrets blaming much of the violence on the far right. Now, Starmer argues he was bound by law not to mention details that could collapse a case in time, a future court case. But he is facing a backlash from those claiming that he withheld information that the public had a right to know and that could have quelled some of the rumours spreading online at the time. What we do know, James, this summer's events were tragic and fast-moving with serious consequences. They involved violence against women and girls, social integration and social media.
Bloomberg's politics and economics reporter Lucy White, who was at that Starmer press conference this morning. Lucy, what is this inquiry looking to find out?
It could potentially be pretty wide-ranging. I mean, essentially what Keir Starmer is hoping to do is to find out which institutions had failings or did fail during this entire process. So, I mean, as you mentioned, the suspect, Axel Rudikabana, he was, he'd had contact with Prevent, the anti-terrorism program. He'd had contact with police, social services. I think Keir Starmer's hoping to pull together a picture, really, to figure out why nothing was done and how the convicted person now got to the point where he was able to actually commit these murders.
The problem is an institutional response the right one? And I wonder whether this idea of another inquiry, a public inquiry, is becoming something of a British answer to that now reviled US phrase, thoughts and prayers.
It's an interesting question because I think in a way, we are seeing inquiries being announced as an answer to pretty much any problem that we're having in the UK at the moment. And it's a very Starmeristic response. Starmer is a former lawyer himself, and he very much likes to rely on that kind of due process, finding the answers, doing everything in a very sort of logical manner. Whether that's actually going to quell some of the disquiet that we saw, for example, over last summer, whether it's going to make people feel as though their concerns around, the integration of migrants into the community, the huge numbers of migrants that we've seen coming to the country, whether those concerns are actually valid or not, it's not necessarily an answer to any of that. And I think, possibly the inquiry risks just taking so long that over the meantime, people feel like they're not being listened to, that they don't have answers.
So you call it a sort of Starmer-like response there, Lucy, and it's fascinating because reading that speech, he frames what's happened here as a failure of the state, whereas those on the right, like Nigel Farage from Reform UK, or even further in the far right, would frame this as a failure of culture and of integration and of migration. What is the Prime Minister's response to that sort of accusation?
So Keir Starmer did bring this up in the press conference this morning. He said, that obviously there are concerns that this is all due to migration or that it's due to integration of migrants into the community. I mean, for sure, I think he acknowledged that there are issues around the sheer quantity of migration that we've seen into the UK in recent years. But at the same time, he noted that this isn't something that's attributable purely to migration or to integration. This is in part due to social media, and he talked about the changing face of terrorism in the UK. The fact that a lot of the terrorism that we're seeing is now driven by, he said, young men sitting in their bedrooms consuming really horrific material online. And it's not just kind of attributable to people who have a different ethnic background. It's also due to people on the far right who, again, are consuming this horrifically violent material online. And then he used the phrase violence for violence's sake. They want to go out and commit a horrific attack, not necessarily for the furtherment of any agenda particularly, but just to express some sort of anger or to commit similar acts to what they've been watching online.
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, the accusation levelled at Starmer is, accusing him of it being a cover-up. But as you say, the idea that we're in a new era of online information and misinformation, I think that really does surely strike a note with people in the UK that perhaps we're in this new paradigm. We saw it during the summer, and perhaps we're seeing it now also, that the online world, and is having these real world consequences in ways that are novel and really very hard to get a handle on. I mean, if Starmer's talking about institutional solutions, how do we solve that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because last year we saw the online safety bill being brought into force, and that was designed to address a lot of these kind of clashes that we're seeing between safety online and in the real world. It's interesting because there was a part of the bill originally, as it was listed before it was passed, that would have made legal but harmful content online prohibited by the bill. And that was taken out actually because at the time, many people thought that that would kind of have a chilling effect on social media, that, you'd be allowed to say stuff in real life and then you wouldn't be allowed to say it online because it might fall into this category of legal but harmful. So that was taken out. But then obviously we had the riots over the summer and this kind of issue around the things that you can say online and the misinformation that can be spread online really sort of came to the fore again. And since then, we've seen Ofcom, the regulator, sort of think about it's putting proposals together around a crisis response for instances like we saw over the summer for riots and other such instances that would look at how to regulate social media and how to kind of push them to respond when there is this huge spread of misinformation online that is causing a crisis response. I mean, it's worth saying as well that we have also seen certain people being charged with crimes for things that they have said online during the riots. Generally, it was because it was, sort of racially harmful material that they were posting online, and people have been charged for that. And again, we've seen a backlash from that, against that from certain people because they are concerned that people are having their freedom of expression curtailed. I think that's possibly not worth arguing, but there is that kind of clash against what people feel that they should be able to say online and what's actually worth saying online and what's causing harm.
You walked us through a lot of the policy changes there. It's been 6 months, though, since the riots, and they marked in many ways the start of Starmer's premiership. At that time, Elon Musk was tweeting about them. We have Nigel Farage tweeting about now, calling it a cover-up overnight. Does this statement, which I know has come early in the morning, sort of Labour trying to get ahead of sort of a conversation nationally about this issue, mark a change going forward of how Starmer intends to talk about these issues?
It was interesting because I think in the aftermath of the riots, we had Nick Thomas-Symonds, the cabinet secretary, saying, that they would be prepared to go back and look at the online safety bill and considering changing the bill in if that was needed to kind of bolster these regulations, these rules to prevent misinformation spreading online. We did then see the number 10 kind of pushed back against that and saying, we're not going to consider going back and looking at the online safety bill. But since then, we have seen Ofcom, as I say, kind of putting together its own consultations, its own rules on how to regulate that. The fact that we've seen Keir Starmer come out this morning and actually talk about social media and talk about how people are consuming content, really awful content online in a lot of cases, it does kind of make me think that maybe Starmer is thinking that he does need to put a bit more focus back onto the social media side of things. But this isn't just an inquiry about into social media. He's looking at all the institutions that were involved in this. He's looking at Prevent. He's looking at the police. He's looking at the definition of terrorism itself. So I wouldn't say it's going to be sort of narrowly defined as a kind of an attack on social media.
Okay, interesting. And so I suppose the last thought is around whether this is going to change how the UK deals with terror threats in future.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we did see Starmer say that this is the changing face of terrorism. We're seeing lone actors who are already in the country who are perhaps consuming really terrible stuff and then wanting to put that into real life. And that is a whole different kettle of fish to perhaps the actors that we've seen in the past working with international terrorist organizations to produce these wholly coordinated attacks. So I think the Prime Minister's spoken about needing to address how we look at these people, how we find these people, how we tackle them, how we work with the authorities to get to them before they commit anything that is so terrible. And again, this is going to bringing all the authorities together, looking at Prevent and how, for example, in the 2 or 3 times that the convicted person in this case was working with Prevent or had been reported to Prevent, looking at how Prevent could have actually, sort of stepped in there and prevented any of this from happening.
Absolutely. Some really difficult questions, and the work will no doubt continue now with this inquiry. Lucy White, thank you so much for joining us this morning following Keir Starmer's press conference about what happened last summer in Southport. I want to say the names of the 3 victims, of course. Alice Da Silva Aguirre, who was 9, BB King, who was 6, and Elsie Dot Stancombe, who was only 7 years old. Axel Rudder-Cabana of Lancashire pleading guilty to 16 offences in that case that has caused such heartache and questioning in the UK.
That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Graston-Macchia. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm James Woolcock. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.